You know how smell is the strongest trigger for memory? For most people, the smell of fresh blueberries reminds them of summer or pie or their grandmother's kitchen. For me, it smells like safety. It smells like the calm before the storm. It was 1996. The world was different then. No smartphones buzzing in your pocket, no constant connectivity. If you wanted to disappear, you could just step outside. But inside our little office, nobody wanted to disappear. We were a boutique firm, which is just a fancy way of saying we were 20 people crammed into a second-floor suite above a dry cleaner, raising money for local charities. The pay was garbage. I think I was making $6 an hour plus commission, but God, I loved that place. Every morning at 8 a.m., the air conditioning would kick on with this rhythmic industrial thrum-clank hiss, a mechanical heartbeat that signaled the start of the day. And 5 minutes later, the smell would hit. The office cafe downstairs made these blueberry scones, heavy, cake-like, steaming hot. The scent of warm vanilla and baked fruit would drift up through the ventilation, mixing with the sharp tang of ozone from the photocopiers and the faint chemical smell of correction fluid. That was the scent of my sanctuary. "Happy Tuesday, sunshine," a voice boomed. I looked up from my desk, a beige laminate monstrosity covered in sticky notes. Bob was standing there holding 2 mugs of coffee. Bob was our boss. He was a man shaped like a barrel with a mustache that had been out of style since the 70s and eyes that crinkled when he smiled, which was always. He wasn't just a manager, he was a frantic, benevolent uncle to 20 misfit toys. "Coffee's fresh," Bob said, setting a mug on my coaster. "Don't tell the others. I'm playing favorites." "I gave Mike and Dave donuts 5 minutes ago," I said, taking the mug. It was warm against my palms, grounding me. "Bribery," Bob winked. "Pure bribery." I watched him walk away, his suspenders straining slightly. I saw him stop at the reception desk where Sarah, our new 19-year-old intern, was looking frantic, dumping out her purse. Her eyes were red. She was short on gas money. We all knew she was struggling. I watched Bob pretend to stumble. He bent down with a groan, his knees popping audibly, and came up holding a $20 bill. "Would you look at that?" I heard him say, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to preserve her dignity. "Must have fallen out of your pocket, Sarah. Careful now." He pressed the money into her hand and walked away before she could argue. Sarah looked at the bill, then at Bob's retreating back, and wiped her eyes. That was us. That was the family. We had the brothers, Mike and Dave, who sat in the back corner. They were big guys, warehouse types who'd moved into sales. They spent half the day throwing paper footballs and the other half aggressively selling raffle tickets for the firefighters' ball. And then there were the sisters, me, Lisa, and Jen. We sat in a pod of cubicles near the window, sharing lipstick, lunch, and secrets. It was a kingdom of blissful sunshine, safe, predictable, boring in the most beautiful way possible. I didn't know it then, but the kingdom was about to fall. The shift happened on a Thursday. It wasn't a noise, it was a temperature drop. I know that sounds like a ghost story cliche, but I swear, the room felt heavier. The chatter, the constant background buzz of telemarketing scripts and laughter, died down, rippling into silence from the front door to the back. I swiveled my chair around. Bob was standing at the entrance, beaming his usual high-wattage smile, but the man standing next to him, he seemed to swallow the light in the room. "Everyone," Bob announced, clapping his hands, "gather round. I want you to meet the newest member of our team." Steve. He was tall, maybe 6'3", but it was his width that was unsettling. He wasn't just overweight, he was dense. He wore a gray suit that looked like it had been bought at a rummage sale. The sleeves were too short, exposing thick, hairy wrists, and the fabric was shiny with wear at the elbows. But it was the smell that hit me first. As he walked past my desk to the center of the room, a wave of air followed him. It was a sour cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, the kind that seeps into your pores and lives there, layered over something sharp and medicinal, like rubbing alcohol and decay. Later, we found out he'd been fired from the hospital morgue. At that moment, though, I just thought he smelled like a doctor's waiting room that hadn't been cleaned. "This is Steve," Bob said, patting the giant on the back. Steve didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just stood there, his arms hanging dead at his sides. "He's going to be helping out with the Policeman's Benevolent Fund Drive." The office was silent. Usually, we'd cheer, Mike would throw a stress ball. Someone would offer a scone. But the lizard brain, that primal part of the amygdala that kept our ancestors from being eaten by saber-toothed tigers, was screaming at all of us. Danger, wrong, predator. "Hey, Steve," Dave said from the back. It came out wary. Steve turned his head slowly. He didn't turn his body, just his neck, like an owl. "Hello," he said. His voice was deep, wet, and devoid of inflection. "Well," Bob clapped again, sensing the awkwardness, "let's introduce the girls. Steve, this is the heart of the operation." Bob guided him toward our pod. Toward me, Lisa, and Jen. My heart did a strange double tap against my ribs. "Stop it," I told myself. "Don't be a snob. The guy is Nevis. He's the new kid. Be nice." I forced a smile onto my face. It felt tight, like a mask that didn't fit right. I stood up. I was wearing a floral dress, something modest and loose. But as Steve approached, I suddenly felt naked. "Hi, Steve," Lisa said, extending a hand. "I'm Lisa." Steve took her hand. "Lisa," he repeated. He looked at her face. Normal, fine. Then he turned to me. He stepped into my personal space. The buffer zone, that invisible 3-foot circle of polite society, vanished. He was close enough that I could see the pores on his nose, close enough to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "And this is our top earner," Bob said proudly. "Hi," I squeaked. I cleared my throat, trying to find my professional voice. Well, everyone calls me OP. I stuck my hand out. I wanted to keep the desk between us, but the angle was wrong. Steve reached out. His hand was enormous, the fingers thick and pale like uncooked sausages. He enveloped my hand. His skin was shockingly dry, like sandpaper. He squeezed. It wasn't a firm, business-like shake. It was a capture. He held my hand suspended in the air. The silence stretched out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It became awkward, then weird. I tried to pull back, just a micro movement, a subtle signal that the transaction was over. He didn't let go. Instead, he moved his thumb. Slowly, deliberately, he stroked the back of my hand. Once. Twice. It was a caress. Intimate. Grimy. I froze. My brain short-circuited. Did he just... No, his hand slipped. He's just awkward. He doesn't know how to act. "Nice to meet you," he said. As he spoke, his eyes left my face. They didn't wander. They dropped like stones, straight to my chest. It wasn't a glance. A glance I could have forgiven. Men glanced. It happened. This was a visual consumption. He stared at my breast with a slack-jawed, hungry intensity that made my skin crawl. It lasted less than a second, just a flicker before his eye snapped back to mine. But the message was clear. I see you, and I want to take. He finally released my hand. I felt phantom pressure where his fingers had been. I wanted to wipe my hand on my dress, to scrub it with soap, but Bob was standing right there, smiling, oblivious. "Well," Bob said, steering Steve toward an empty desk in the corner, "let's get you settled." I sat down slowly. My knees felt watery. Jen leaned over the partition, her voice a harsh whisper. "Did you see that?" "See what?" I lied. I picked up a pen, but my fingers were trembling. "The way he looked at you. He looked at you like a pork chop." "Stop it," I whispered back, staring at my computer screen, but the green text was blurring together. "He's just big and awkward. Don't be mean, Jen. He probably just doesn't know how to act around people." "He gave me the creeps," she muttered, sliding back into her seat. I nodded, pretending to work. But I wasn't working. I was listening. I could hear him settling in across the room, the groan of his chair as he sat down, the snick hiss of a lighter, followed quickly by Bob telling him, No, Steve, smoking is outside." I heard a heavy grunt of annoyance. I looked down at my hand. I could still feel the dry rasp of his thumb against my skin. He's just awkward, I told myself again. Don't make a scene. Don't be that girl who thinks everyone is hitting on her. Just do your work. I reached for my coffee, hoping the warmth would settle my stomach, but the coffee had gone cold, and the smell of the blueberry scones suddenly turned cloying, sickeningly sweet in the back of my throat. The sun was still shining outside, but recede. They pooled in the corners of the office, thick and suffocating, for the next 2 weeks. It started with a whisper. It was a rainy Tuesday. The windows of our second-floor suite were lashed with gray streaks of water, turning the office into a dimly lit fishbowl. The sound of the rain against the glass was usually soothing, a soft hiss that drowned out the traffic below, but today it felt oppressive, sealing us in. I was heading toward the break room to refill my coffee mug. The hallway was narrow, lined with filing cabinets that narrowed the path to a single-file squeeze. As I passed the door to the manager's office, Dan's office, our second in command, I heard voices. The door was ajar, just a crack. A sliver of yellow light spilled out onto the industrial gray carpet. "I'm just saying, Bob." Dan's voice was low, agitated. "The paperwork came through late. The hospital called back." I stopped. I shouldn't have stopped. Eavesdropping wasn't in my nature, but the tone of Dan's voice, usually so jovial and loud, was sharp with worry. I pressed myself against the filing cabinet, holding my breath. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Dan," Bob's voice came through, softer, pleading. "The man is trying to rebuild." "Rebuild?" Bob scoffed. "Bob, he was in the morgue. Do you understand what the reference check said? He wasn't fired for lateness. He was caught interacting." "It was never proven," Bob said quickly. "Alleged. It was alleged." "He was found with a Jane Doe, unsupervised, at 3 a.m. They said he was grooming her hair, talking to her." The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. My stomach dropped, a physical sensation of falling. Grooming her hair, the image flashed in my mind. Steve's thick, sausage-like fingers moving through cold, dead strands. "We needed the bodies for the phone drive," Bob said, sounding tired. "He's a good worker so far. Let's just keep an eye on him, okay?" I pulled away from the door, my hands trembling so hard coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug, burning my knuckles. I didn't feel the heat. I felt cold, freezing, bone-deep cold. I walked back to my desk like a zombie. The office looked the same. Jen was typing, Mike was laughing on the phone, but the lens had shifted. The awkward oaf wasn't awkward. He was something else entirely. I sat down. Steve was across the room. He was chewing gum, an open-mouth, wet smack, squelch, smack sound that seemed deafening in the sudden quiet of my mind. He looked up. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. He just chewed. Smack. Squelch. His eyes drifted down to my neck, then back up. "He knows," I thought irrationally. "He knows I know." "OP," Jen whispered. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What is it?" I turned to her. I wanted to vomit. I whispered, "Meet me in the bathroom now." The revelation spread through the sisters like a contagion. We didn't talk about it out loud. We couldn't. It was too horrifying, too bizarre. Instead, it lived in glances. A raised eyebrow when Steve walked by. A subtle shifting of chairs to create barricades.
But barricades don't stop water, and they didn't stop Steve. The daily onslaught, as I came to call it in my therapy sessions years later, wasn't an explosion. It was erosion. It was the slow, methodical wearing down of boundaries until you forgot where your skin ended and the danger began. It happened at the filing cabinets 3 days later. I was filing donor cards for the firefighters' ball, focused on the alphabetizing to quiet my nerves. The filing alcove was a dead end, a U-shape of metal drawers with no exit. I sensed him before I heard him. The air pressure changed. The light from the overhead fluorescent tube dimmed as a shadow fell over me. I turned around. Steve was there. He wasn't doing anything illegal. He was just standing. He was leaning against the doorframe, blocking the only way out. He was holding a stack of papers, ostensibly waiting for a drawer, but he wasn't looking at the papers. "Busy?" he asked. The space was too small. He was sucking up all the oxygen. The smell of him, that medicinal, rubbing alcohol and stale smoke stench, filled my nose. It was heavy, cloying. Just finishing up," I stammered. I turned back to the drawer, my fingers fumbling with the cards. "Just file the card. S. Smith. Smythe. Just file it and leave." "You have nice handwriting," he said. He took a step into the alcove. I stiffened. "Thanks." "And you dress nice. Professional." He took another step. He was right behind me now. I could feel the heat radiating off his body, a humid, uncomfortable warmth that made the back of my neck prickle. I could hear the wet sound of his breathing, a slight wheeze on the exhale. "I like this material," he murmured. Before I could move, before I could process what was happening, his hand came up. He didn't grab me. That would have been easier to deal with. A grab is an attack. A grab justifies a scream. He reached out and touched the fabric of my blouse right where the shoulder meets the neck. He rubbed the silk between his thumb and forefinger. "Soft," he whispered. His knuckle grazed my collarbone. It was accidental, maybe. Or maybe it was the most calculated move in the world. I didn't scream. I didn't slap his hand away. I froze. It's called the fawn response. It's when your brain decides that fighting will get you killed and fleeing is impossible, so you just submit. You become a statue. You smile to appease the predator. It's polyester blend," I said. My voice sounded high, thin, like a child's. "From Kmart." I was discussing the fabric content of my shirt with the man who had touched corpses while his finger rested on my throat. "Soft," he repeated, staring at the spot where his finger touched my skin. Then he smiled, a slow, wet parting of lips. "Excuse me," I squeaked. I ducked under his arm. I literally had to duck and scrambled out of the alcove. I heard him chuckle as I fled, a low, dry sound. "See you later, OP." We went to Dan the next morning. It took us 2 hours to work up the courage. Lisa, Jen, and I marched into the second manager's office like a delegation from a war-torn country. Dan looked up from his paperwork, annoyed. "What is it, ladies? The copier jammed again?" "It's Steve," I said. My voice was shaking, but I forced it steady. He's touching us, Dan. He backs us into corners. He touches our hair. Yesterday, he touched my chest." "Whoa, whoa, whoa." Dan held up a hand, chuckling nervously. "Touched your chest or touched your shirt?" "He touched my collarbone," I said, pointing to the spot. "It felt like it was burning. He blocked me in the filing room." "And he stares," Jen added, her voice fierce. "He stares at our chest while we're talking to him. It's disgusting." Dan sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who just wanted to go home and watch the game, not deal with the messy, uncomfortable reality of human behavior.
"Look, girls," Dan said, leaning back in his chair, he's a different breed. He's from an older generation. He's a tactile guy. Some people are just huggers, you know? "He didn't hug me," I said, my voice rising. "He petted me, like a dog." "I think you're reading too much into it," Dan said, his voice hardening slightly. "He's had a rough go of it lately. He's trying to fit in. Don't be so sensitive. If we start policing every look and handshake, nobody will get any work done." He picked up his pen. The meeting was over. "Just ignore it," Dan mumbled, looking at a spreadsheet. "He's harmless." We walked out of the office in silence. The betrayal fit me harder than the fear. Bob was the fun uncle, but Dan was supposed to be the adult, and the adult had just told us that our safety was less important than his convenience. The family wasn't a fortress. It was a cage, and we were locked in with the animal. The breaking point, or at least the moment the terror shifted from uncomfortable to primal, happened on a Friday. I had gone out for lunch, grabbing a sandwich from the deli down the street. It started raining again, a sudden downpour that soaked my shoes, so I ran back to the office early. It was 12:45 p.m. The office was usually empty during lunch hour. Bob and Dan were out, the guys were at the burger joint, and the girls were shopping. I shook my umbrella out in the hallway and pushed open the glass door. The lights were off in the main bullpen, save for the gray daylight filtering through the blinds. It was quiet. I walked toward my desk. Someone was sitting in my chair. I stopped. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. It was Steve. He wasn't looking at my computer screen. He wasn't rifling through my drawers for files. He was holding my cardigan, a blue knit sweater I kept on the back of my chair for when the AC got too cold. He had the sweater pressed to his face. He was inhaling, deep, long, shuddering breaths. His eyes were closed. His head was tilted back, exposing the thick, pale column of his throat. I stood there frozen, water dripping from my hair onto the carpet. Drip, drip, drip. He must have heard me. He didn't jump. He didn't drop the sweater and stammer an excuse. Slowly, languidly, he lowered the cardigan. He opened his eyes. In the dim light, they looked black, dead. He turned the swivel chair to face me. He was still holding my sweater, his fingers kneading the wool. "You're back early," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "What are you doing?" I whispered. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. He looked at the sweater in his hands, then back at me. He smiled, not the polite office smile, but a private, knowing smirk. "Just smelling the blueberries," he said. The world tilted. He had taken the one thing, the scent of the scones, my safety, my memory, and he had twisted it. He had infected it. "Get out of my chair," I said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. He stood up. He was so big. He placed the sweater gently back on the chair, patting it once, like you would pat a child's head. "Smells sweet," he murmured as he walked past me. He didn't touch me this time. He didn't have to. He had touched my space. He had marked his territory. I waited until the elevator doors dinged and slid shut. Then I ran to the bathroom. I locked the stall door, collapsed onto the tile floor, and dry-heaved until my ribs ached. There was no misunderstanding this. There was no tactile guy. This was a hunt, and I was the prey.
After the sweater incident, silence became my strategy. It was a mistake. I convinced myself that if I just kept my head down, if I made myself smaller, flatter, less visible, he would lose interest. I stopped wearing skirts. I stopped wearing makeup. I started wearing a baggy gray hoodie over my clothes, even though the office was stiflingly hot. I was trying to unmake myself. But predators don't stop when the prey plays dead, they just get closer. The following Tuesday was Bob's birthday. In our office, birthdays were mandatory joy. It was a ritual, cards, cake, and a chaotic lunch at Luigi's, a red sauce Italian joint down the block that smelled of burnt garlic and cheap Chianti. I didn't want to go. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Stay at your desk." But refusing Bob's birthday lunch was like kicking a puppy. It just wasn't done. "Come on, OP," Bob beamed, adjusting his birthday tie, which played a tinny version of Happy Birthday when you pressed it. I ordered the calamari for the table. So I went. The restaurant was loud, a cacophony of clattering plates, shouting waiters, and Frank Sinatra booming from the speakers. We pushed 3 tables together. I tried to maneuver myself to the end, near the exit, next to Jen. But Bob, in his chaotic benevolence, started directing traffic. Nah, Jen, you sit here by me. Mike, you take the end. Steve, why don't you squeeze in right there? Bob pointed to the chair directly across from me. My stomach turned to ice. Steve sat down. The table was narrow. His knees bumped mine immediately. I recoiled, pulling my legs back so far my heels hooked onto the rung of my own chair. "Happy birthday, Bob!" everyone cheered, raising their glasses of iced tea and soda. Steve raised his glass too. He was smiling. It was a terrifying performance. To everyone else, to Bob, to the waiter, even to Mike and Dave, Steve was the life of the party. He was cracking jokes about the weather. He was passing the bread basket. He was normal. But under the table, his foot kept seeking mine. A tap, a brush, a pressure. I kept moving my legs, twisting my body into a pretzel to avoid contact. I stared at my menu, my eyes burning. "Don't cry," I ordered myself. "Do not cry in front of Bob. Do not ruin this lunch." The waiter arrived with a dessert cart. "Tiramisu for the birthday boy," the waiter announced. The table erupted in applause. Steve leaned forward, resting his elbows on the red checkered tablecloth. He invaded the center space. "Looks good," Steve said loudly, grinning at Bob. Then his eyes locked onto mine.
The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade out, like someone turning a volume dial. The laughter, the music, the clatter, it all became a distant hum. All I could see were his eyes, beady, wet. He picked up his fork and pointed it at me. To the group, he was just gesturing, but his lips moved and his voice dropped to a register that cut through the noise, meant only for me. "I bet you taste sweeter than that," he murmured. It was vile. It was visceral. It was a verbal assault delivered with a smile. "What was that, Steve?" Bob asked, laughing, wiping tomato sauce from his mustache. Steve didn't blink. He didn't look away from me. I said, "I bet OP would prefer the cheesecake. She looks like a cheesecake girl." "Oh, she is," Bob agreed happily. "OP loves cheesecake." I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt nausea rise in my throat, hot and acidic. I had to smile, I had to nod, I had to play the part, because if I screamed, I would be the crazy one. I would be the drama queen, ruining the birthday. I'm not hungry," I managed to whisper. Steve took a bite of his tiramisu, maintaining eye contact. He licked his spoon. The siege began the next morning. The office, once my kingdom of blissful sunshine, had transformed into a bunker. The sisters, me, Jen, and Lisa, developed a silent code, a buddy system. If I stood up to go to the photocopier, Jen stood up too. If Lisa went to the bathroom, I waited by the door. We moved in a phalanx, never leaving one of us isolated. Steve noticed. Of course he noticed.
He didn't take it well. The nice guy mask began to slip, revealing the petulant, angry child beneath. It started with noise. He would slam his desk drawers. Bang! I would jump, my heart hammering. 10 minutes later, bang! He would kick the trash can. He would sigh loudly, a heavy, aggressive exhale that sounded like a growl. He was vibrating with suppressed rage, a walking pressure cooker. Thursday afternoon, I was walking past his desk, flanked by Lisa, when he spun his chair around. "Why are you ignoring me?" he demanded. His voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud, accusatory. "We're working, Steve," Lisa said, her voice trembling but brave. "You're not working," he spat, his face flushing a splotchy red. "You think you're better than me," he sneered. He stood up. He loomed over us. "You think you're some kind of princess? Too good to say hello?" "Steve, sit down," Dave called out from the back of the room. It was the first time one of the brothers had intervened. Steve froze. He looked at Dave, then back at me. His eyes narrowed. "Fine," he hissed. He sat down so hard his chair groaned. He grabbed a stapler and slammed it onto a stack of papers. Thwack, thwack, thwack. That weekend was agony. Sunday nights are usually sad because the weekend is over. This Sunday night was pure dread. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the wind rattle my window pane. Every shadow looked like him. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like his heavy tread. He knows where I work, I thought, my mind spiraling. Does he know where I live? Did he follow me? Is he outside right now? I got up and checked the locks on my apartment door 3 times. The deadbolt looked flimsy. The wood looked weak. I realized then that there was no HR department to call. There was no protocol. In 1996 and a small family business, HR was just Bob. And Bob thought Steve was a project. I was alone. The breaking point came on Monday at 10 a.m. It was overcast, the sky a bruised purple. The office lights were flickering. One of the fluorescent tubes was dying, strobing in a nauseating rhythm. Buzz, flicker, buzz. I was on the phone with a major donor, Mrs. Gable, trying to secure a venue for the charity auction. "Yes, Mrs. Gable," I said, putting on my professional voice, winding the curly telephone cord around my finger. We would be honored to use the ballroom. The cord. It was a leash. I was tethered to the wall. I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Steve was walking down the aisle. He wasn't walking toward the break room. He was walking toward me. I turned my chair slightly, trying to signal, "I'm on the phone." He didn't stop. He walked right up to my cubicle. He stepped inside. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Just one moment, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice tight. I covered the mouthpiece. "Steve, I'm on a call." He didn't speak. He smiled that wet, slack-jawed smile. He moved behind my chair. I was trapped. The desk was in front of me, the wall to my right, and Steve behind me. "Please," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. He leaned down. I could feel his body heat radiating through the back of my chair. I could smell him, the smoke, the sweat, the decay.
He reached out. His hand clamped onto my upper arm. It wasn't a touch. It wasn't a caress. It was a vice grip. His fingers dug into my bicep hard enough to bruise. It hurt. I gasped, dropping the pen I was holding. He leaned closer, his mouth inches from my ear. His breath was hot and moist. "You can't hang up," he whispered. "You have to be a good girl and do your job." He squeezed harder. Pain shot up my shoulder. "Stop it!" I whimpered, trying to pull away. I couldn't move. He was pinning me to the desk with his body weight. "Does it hurt?" he whispered. "I bet you like it." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't bravery. It was pure, animalistic survival. The years of politeness, the social conditioning to be nice, the fear of making a scene, it all incinerated in a flash of white-hot rage. I didn't care about Mrs. Gable. I didn't care about the job. I slammed the receiver down onto the cradle. Crack. I spun the chair around, ripping my arm from his grasp. "Let go of me!" I didn't say it. I screamed it. It was a primal shriek that tore from the bottom of my lungs, echoing off the cheap acoustic tiles of the ceiling. "Get away from me! Don't you touch me!" I stood up, shaking so hard my knees knocked together. Tears, hot, angry, humiliating tears burst from my eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. The typing stopped. The laughter stopped. The flicker buzz of the light seemed to roar. Steve took a step back, looking genuinely shocked. He hadn't expected the rabbit to bite. Across the room, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. It was Dan. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at his paperwork. He was looking at the red, hand-shaped mark blooming on my arm, and he looked furious.
Panic and explosion. The silence in the office wasn't empty, it was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Steve stood there, his mouth slightly open, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He looked from me to Dan, then back to me, his hands twitching at his sides. "She's crazy," Steve muttered, but his voice lacked its usual weight. It was thin. "I was just checking if she needed." "Steve," Dan said. It wasn't a shout, it was a flat, low vibration that carried across the room. Dan walked out from behind his desk. He was a small man, usually hunched over ledgers, but he walked tall now. He walked straight to my cubicle, ignoring Steve entirely. He looked at my arm. The skin was already mottling, angry red streaks turning purple where Steve's fingertips had dug in. "Jesus," Dan whispered. He didn't look at Steve. He looked at me, his eyes wide and shocked as if a veil had been ripped away. The tactile guy defense, the generational difference excuse, it all evaporated in the face of that bruise. "OP," Dan said, his voice gentle, "get your purse." I have to finish the call logs," I stammered, wiping my face with the back of my hand. I was shaking so hard my teeth were clicking together. The adrenaline tasted metallic, like I had been chewing on foil. "Leave them," Dan said. "Get your purse, you're going home." He put a hand on my back, lightly, respectfully, and guided me toward the exit. As we passed Steve, Dan stopped. He didn't look up at the giant, he looked at Steve's chest, right at the cheap, stained tie. "Don't speak," Dan said softly. Steve opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, the predator looked unsure of his footing. We reached the glass doors of the entrance. Dan opened one for me. "Take tomorrow off, OP. Paid. Don't worry about anything." "I'm sorry," I whispered, the guilt of the victim flooding in. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I just—" "Go home," Dan said. As I stepped out into the hallway, I turned back for one last look. The office was frozen in a tableau, but the composition had changed. Steve was standing in the middle of the aisle, alone, and in the back corner, the brothers, Mike and Dave, had stood up. They weren't throwing paper footballs. They weren't laughing. Mike was rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt, revealing forearms thick from years of warehouse work. Dave was cracking his knuckles, staring at the back of Steve's head with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was focus. They looked like wolves who had just realized the sheepdog was asleep. The door clicked shut, cutting off the view. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of paralysis. I went home to my apartment, locked the door, and sat on my couch with the lights off. Every car door slamming outside sounded like a gunshot. Every footstep in the hallway sounded like Steve's heavy, dragging gait. He's going to be fired, I told myself, and then he's going to come here. I imagined him standing on the sidewalk looking up at my window. I imagined the phone ringing and hearing nothing but his heavy, wet breathing. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment his hand clamped onto my arm. The phantom pressure was still there, a ghost grip that made me flinch every time the sheets brushed against my skin. Panic and explosion. But beneath the fear, there was something else. A gnawing, sick feeling of guilt. I ruined it, I thought. I ruined the blissful kingdom. Bob is going to be disappointed. Everyone is going to hate me for making things awkward.
It's a specific kind of madness that women were taught in the 90s, that our safety was less important than the comfort of the group, that being difficult was a greater sin than being assaulted. By Wednesday morning, I was a wreck. My eyes were puffy, my arm was a canvas of purple and yellow, and I felt like I was walking to the gallows. I parked my car a block away, terrified that Steve would be waiting in the parking lot. I walked to the building, hugging my purse to my chest, scanning every alleyway, every parked van. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, afraid to be trapped in the box. I reached the second-floor landing. I stared at the door to our suite. Charity Promotions, Inc. It looked the same. I took a deep breath, tasting the stale hallway air, and pushed the door open. I expected shouting. I expected tension. I expected to see a security guard or a police officer. Instead, I heard typing. The rhythm of the office was unchanged. Click-clack. The low murmur of voices on phones, the smell of coffee. I stepped inside. Sarah, the receptionist, looked up. Her eyes went wide, then soft. She gave me a small, conspiratorial nod. "Morning, OP," she whispered. I walked down the aisle to my desk. Every head turned. But they didn't look away in embarrassment. Jen gave me a thumbs up. Lisa mouthed, "Are you okay?" The air in the room was different. The heaviness, that oppressive storm cloud pressure that had hung over us for weeks, was gone. The atmosphere was clean. Electric, like the air after a lightning strike clears the ozone. I reached my cubicle. My desk was exactly as I had left it, except someone had placed a fresh blueberry scone on my keyboard. A peace offering. A welcome back. I sat down, my fart still fluttering in my throat. Then I saw him. Steve was at his desk in the corner. He hadn't been fired. My breath hitched. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. How was he still here? Did they do nothing? Then Steve turned his head. He moved slowly, stiffly, like an old man or someone whose body was shouting in pain. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was buttoned all the way to the top, but it couldn't hide the swelling. The left side of his face was a landscape of violence. His eye was swollen shut, a bulbous purple mass. His lip was split, held together with butterfly bandages. There was a dark, greenish bruise blooming along his jawline, poorly concealed with what looked like theatrical makeup. He held his left arm tight against his ribs, guarding them. I stared. I couldn't help it. He saw me looking. In the past, this would have been the moment he leered, the moment he stuck out his tongue or winked. But Steve didn't leer. He flinched. His good eye widened in genuine animal fear. He quickly looked down at his desk, hunching his shoulders as if expecting a blow. I looked toward the back of the room. Mike and Dave were sitting at their desks. They weren't looking at me. They were working. But Mike's knuckles were scabbed over, and Dave was nursing a cup of coffee with a hand that looked swollen. I realized then that the meeting hadn't been a discussion. It had been a correction. The details of what happened in the alleyway behind the building never made it into the official record. I never asked. Bob never asked. It was a piece of office mythology that existed in the silence between words.
Panic and explosion. The receptionist later told me she had seen them go out the back door for a smoke break. Steve had walked out first, arrogant and strutting. Mike and David followed, closing the heavy steel fire door behind them. They were gone for 20 minutes. When they came back in, Steve was leaning on Mike, weeping softly. Now, in the bright fluorescent light of Wednesday morning, the monster was gone. In his place sat a broken, terrified man. I touched the bruise on my arm. It still hurt, but the fear? The fear was evaporating. OP? I jumped. Steve was standing at the edge of my cubicle. The entire office went dead silent. The typing stopped. The phones were muted. Mike and Dave stood up in the back. The sound of their chairs scraping against the floor was loud, like the racking of a shotgun slide. Steve didn't look at them. He was trembling, visibly shaking. He looked at his shoes, scuffed, cheap leather shoes. He held his hands in front of him, clasped together like a penitent schoolboy. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard, wincing as if his throat was bruised too. I wanted to apologize.
He looked up at me just for a second, then back down. I was wrong, he said. His voice was loud, projected for the room to hear, as if he was reciting a script he had been forced to memorize. I crossed a line. I was disrespectful and ungentlemanly. He took a shaky breath. It will never happen again, I promise. He waited. The power dynamic had inverted so completely it was dizzying. 2 days ago, he was the hunter and I was the prey. Now he was waiting for my permission to exist in the same space. I looked at Mike and Dave. They were watching Steve with stone-cold faces. The wolves were waiting for a signal. I looked back at Steve. I could have crushed him. I could have gone to the police. I could have demanded he be fired right then and there. But I looked at his split lip. I looked at the terror in his one good eye. Okay, Steve, I said. My voice was steady. Thank you. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He nodded once, jerking his head. Then he turned and shuffled back to his desk, moving with the fragile care of shattered glass. Mike and Dave sat down. The typing resumed. The ecosystem had been restored, but the rules had changed. I picked up the blueberry scone. It was cold, but it smelled like victory. I took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. But the story wasn't over. Violence can stop a behavior, but it rarely changes a soul. We had broken the monster, but we hadn't fixed the man. That part would come later, and it would start with a deck of cards.
3 weeks passed. The bruises on my arm faded to yellow, then vanished. The bruises on Steve's face lasted longer, shifting from purple to a dull, sickly green, a constant visual reminder of the New World Order. Steve didn't speak. He worked, he filed, he went to the bathroom and came straight back. He had become a ghost in his own body, haunting the edges of the room, terrified to make a sound. It was sad. I know I shouldn't have felt that way. He was a predator who had hunted me, but seeing a human being reduced to a shivering nerve ending was hard to watch. The wolves, Mike and Dave, never let their guard down. If Steve so much as sneezed, they stopped typing and watched him. Then came the cribbage board. It was a rainy Tuesday, much like the day he had arrived. We were eating lunch at our desks because of the weather. Mike had brought in an old wooden cribbage board, a beautiful thing, inlaid with ivory shaped like the number 29. "Who's in?" Mike yelled, shuffling a deck of cards. The sound was crisp, rhythmic. Zip, zip, zip. "I'm in," Jen yelled. "I don't know how to play," I admitted, spinning my chair around. "It's easy," Mike said, but he was already dealing to Jen. "You just count to 15. I sat there, watching them move the little metal pegs. Plink, plink. It looked like a secret language I didn't speak. I could show you." The voice came from the corner. It was rusty, unused. I turned. Steve was holding a sandwich, but he wasn't eating. He was looking at the board with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Mike stopped shuffling. The room went quiet. The wolf looked at the sheep. "You play, Steve?" Mike asked, his voice flat. "My dad," he whispered, clearing his throat. "My dad taught me. I was pretty good once." He looked at me. For the first time in weeks, he held my gaze. There was no leering, no hunger, just a desperate, naked plea for connection, for humanity. I felt that old flinch in my gut, the muscle memory of fear. But then I looked at his hands. They were resting on his desk, open, palms up, surrendered. "Okay," I said. "Show me." Mike hesitated, then nodded slowly. He tossed the deck to Steve. Steve caught it. And suddenly, his hands weren't sausages anymore. They were graceful. He shuffled the cards with a fluidity that was mesmerizing, a waterfall of red and black. He pulled up a chair. He sat 3 feet away, respectful, distant. 15-2, 15-4, and a pair is 6, he murmured, moving the pegs. We played for an hour. He didn't touch me. He didn't comment on my clothes. He just taught me the game. And as the pegs marched down the wooden track, I saw the tension drain out of his shoulders. I saw a spark of life return to his eyes. Not the predatory spark, but a human one. The violence had stopped him, but the inclusion was saving him. 2 years later,